Hello everybody, welcome to section number 2, getting started with coding for IBM Watson. In this section, we'll go through 6 major videos or topics. First, we will start with getting a taste of the Watson APIs. In the previous section and videos, I walked you through what are the various Watson APIs, how they're organized. But in the first video, I'll walk you through where are these Watson APIs, where you can find them, and actually start using them in action, giving unstructured data and see what comes out of it. We'll also look at the API documentation and the API using API Explorer. We'll see what you can do with it. Then we'll move over to signing up with IBM Cloud. If you want to start building applications with Watson, one of the first things you have to do is sign up for an account with IBM Cloud, which is free. I'll walk you through the steps. Then we'll move over to setting up your dev environment. We will have to install a few command line interface utilities. I'll walk you through how to use the IBM Cloud web interface or the web console, and a few other tools you may want to have, which will be useful in the subsequent sections when you build applications. Then we'll build actually an application, a very simple Hello World application where not necessarily build an application, but we're going to set up an instance or create an instance of a Watson API, which will be Watson Discovery News, and actually invoke it using a post client like a RESTful client like Postman. Then we'll move over to setting up or installing IBM Node-RED. Node-RED is a program flow editor, which is very useful for building applications, wiring together APIs and services and applications, and build microservices and applications and whatnot. Very useful tool for prototyping and quickly building applications. And we'll use a lot of this in the next set of sections and videos. Then finally, we will set up and install the Python and the Node.js client-side libraries for Watson, which again, we will use a lot in the subsequent videos when we build applications. So as you could see, we are getting into developing applications and writing some code, the section that will help you get there. But in order for us to start building, I want us to get the fundamentals right and get the environment set up and whatnot. So let's go through this section. I'd like to point out a couple of quick name changes IBM has gone through. Bluemix is now IBM Cloud. So if you have heard me refer to Bluemix or keep hearing me refer to Bluemix, I'm referring to IBM Cloud. They're one and the same. Then Watson Conversation is now called Watson Assistant. Again, if you hear me speaking about Watson Conversation, I'm referring to Watson Assistant. And there also used to be a product called Watson Virtual Agent, which is also merged into Watson Assistant. So keep this in the back of your head. In this video, Watson APIs, we will learn about 4 topics. The first topic is, so far you've seen me talk about the various Watson APIs, how they're categorized and where they're available. I'll take this to one more level of detail and show you where you can find the listing of all the Watson APIs and the associated material demos and other documentation you can access. Then we'll actually test drive one of the APIs, which is the Watson Natural Language Understanding API, which can take in unstructured text or a URL and analyze it. Then we'll look at the API reference or the API documentation for that API, where you can locate it, where you can look at the various operations and parameters going in and coming out supported by the API per se. And then last but not least, we will look at the API Explorer, which is another way to test out the Watson APIs. So first things first, I would like you all to bookmark this URL, www.ibm.com/Watson, which is where you could find all the information about Watson, new product announcements, new customer case studies, tutorials, other resources, including the APIs and whatnot. So very handy URL to kind of bookmark and have it. Then the next URL, which is a long URL, I'm pretty certain and sure you'd be hitting this URL pretty much during the duration of this course, but also on an ongoing basis, which is ibm.com/watson/products-services. So I'm going to take a moment to show what this URL actually looks like. So when I launch the URL in a web browser, what you would see, the listing of all the Watson APIs that have been categorized, like I've been talking about. For example, you see the APIs in the conversation category. Then in discovery or knowledge category, you have APIs, vision, speech, language, and empathy. Now, I could go into one of these APIs. For example, I could walk into the Natural Language Understanding API, which is for advanced text analysis, or I call this the kitchen sink for natural language processing. So given unstructured text or URL or HTML, you would be able to analyze various things from it, including entities, concepts, and we'll go to that in detail. But before we go into details, you see the API documentation where you could find information about what the API does and links to the actual documentation if you want to get down to the next level of detail, understand the science behind the API, looking at the API reference documentation and whatnot. So very handy URL, so please bookmark this. Then let's test drive one of the APIs, which is the Natural Language Understanding API. Like I said, the input to this API is a plain text, or you could pass in a URL or a HTML document, and it could be in multiple languages as specified. And what the API actually does is it analyzes unstructured text, and it comes out and gives you around 9 categories or 9 types of information from the deep analysis of the text. It gives you the meta level concepts, the category in which that text could be or the URL could be classified, the emotion, overall document emotion detected, then the semantic entities, the keywords, which are the trigrams or bigrams or unigrams, then other metadata like the author and the publisher, then what kind of relationships you are seeing between entities, then semantic roles like subject, verb, objects, or predicate objects, then sentiment of the text and whatnot. So, like I said, I call this the kitchen sink. You could also train this API, which we will see in a later section, using a tool called Watson Knowledge Studio, where you can train a custom model to extract your own set of entities and relationships, using which you can do a lot of things, including building knowledge graphs and whatnot. So this is the Natural Language Understanding API. So let me actually test this. So I'm going to go back to the browser. And one of the articles I was just randomly picked that I was reading today was about Apple's announcement to offer a $29 battery replacement. I'm pretty sure folks who have been following this know about the issue. But nevertheless, what I wanted to do was, this was a CNN article. I wanted to have Watson analyze this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the page where you can find the Natural Language Understanding API. And you would see a link to call what is called a demo. So every API has a very uniform structure as far as the look and feel and documentation goes. And every API would have a link to a live demo that you could go and play with and test out how actually Watson works and how it responds based on your content, your text, and whatnot. In this case, this demo application uses the Watson APIs in the back, but it gives you a simple UI where you can put in your own text, or you can go and put in your own URL. In this case, I'm going to paste the URL about the Apple iPhone battery issue, and then I'll say Watson, go analyze it. And what Watson comes back and says is, at least in this UI, it gives you around 7 categories of analysis. It came back. It says the overall negative sentiment is negative. As you could imagine, it was a very sensitive topic and there was a negative perception. So Watson has indeed found that there is a negative sentiment with probability of minus 0.33. You could also do targeted sentiment, which you will not do now. Then you could go look at the overall emotion of the document. Always read the highest probabilistic value and the corresponding emotion. In this case, it's anger, rightfully so. Then keywords are usually unigrams or bigrams, or at the most trigrams, that are very relevant and prevalent inside of the article, which is very useful to understand, doing different kinds of clustering analysis, and sometimes you could use this to also do word embeddings and whatnot. But nevertheless, very useful to understand what is the article primarily talking about. Then you could also do what is called semantic entities, which are very specific entities normalized or resolved, including the type they represent. So for example, Apple is a type company with an 87% confidence with respect to that article, and Tim Cook is a person. These dollar symbols represent a quantity. So they semantically tell you what they mean. And categories are how would you categorize this article if you were to organize them. And interestingly, it gives me oil and gas prices for some reason because maybe batteries involved. Then these are meta level concepts that are not explicitly written about, but what the article is talking about. If I were to, as a human being, say, hey, what is this article talking about? You would say these are the kinds of things it talks about. Semantic roles are my subject action objects or subject predicate objects, which are extracted from the text and whatnot. So here is a quick test drive of the API per se, which you can also go try out with your URL.